This morning on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Luke Thompson. Luke is a familiar face to anyone connected to or who has been involved in this little corner of the internet over the last several years. He runs a channel here on YouTube called Whitestone Name and is a co-moderator on the channel Grail Country. He found this corner of the internet on his journey out of Protestantism on his way to Orthodoxy. Luke is known for his fascinating literary finds and discussions on his streams, as well as for his excellent digital hospitality. Always excited to meet someone new. He's not afraid to share his opinion on or thoughts on just about anything theological. Tell me the God you don't believe in, and I probably don't believe in him either. Luke Thompson. I'm excited to get to know Luke better today, here on the Yours Truly podcast. We will no doubt get into spaces everyone watching will likely feel connected to. So, without further delay, I give you Luke Thompson. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Ta-da! This is the Luke Thompson. Thanks for being with me today, man.
Absolutely. Your little, even those little rituals, the introductions, your little graphic, all that stuff, the branding, that stuff is cool. And I suppose, ironically, as someone who's Orthodox and you're Protestant, like my branding, my liturgy, my YouTube liturgy probably sucks. I have my own very non-denominational evangelical liturgy, which is just like whatever I want it to be.
Stripped down.
Chaos. Just come as you are, you, me, and Jesus.
Yeah, man. It's I don't know how to get the programmatic part of me is real. It's as a worship leader, previous life, that thing, which is part of the reason even my connection and journey with higher church is because of how rigid and structured I have been in a stripped down setting.
That's hilarious.
It's kind of,
Yeah, it's like, it's a very, it's kind of like it takes, what that makes me think of is Shia LaBeouf, who became Catholic, but I'm a fan. I watch him. I follow his career just because he's a open wound out walking around type of person like me. And he was saying once where he went to some interview or some picture or something, and he looked really disheveled, and he had on all this, clothes, some with rips in it and things. And he was talking about, though, how it actually takes a lot of intentionality and time to put together that look. Is that
what we're seeing here, Luke? This hair, this mustache, is that what?
That's not, I don't really, there probably is some, so it's intentional, but it's not intentional. Part of it is laziness. Part of it is that I don't know how to do all the technical stuff and intros and things, and that I have just no interest in it. And so I'm not going to do it. It's kind of like what Chad says. I'm just going to have fun and do what I want. And this is going to be whatever it's going to be. But there's also a degree of intentionality in it where I would say it's part of my broader hospitality and almost just kind of sometimes expressed, sometimes just latent antagonism to heavily curated things. I don't like, I don't know. I can see the other side of it, but I really don't. It's a little bit of the dynamic of TLC, come as you are, versus Christian YouTube, because anytime you formalize things too much, you're automatic. It's how hierarchies and everything binds and blinds. You automatically kick out those that aren't formalized with it, but it's somewhat unavoidable. Everybody has a uniform, everybody has a thing, but
yeah, that's the Peugeot value hierarchy that it, like you said, it is unavoidable. And for you or Chad saying just like whatever this come as you are, or just like low, production or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
Like for me, that's also, this is me being authentic to me,
Right.
and so if I was just trying to do something else, that would not be like an authentic approach to this stuff in a lot of ways for me. It's like, these are what I play with.
Right.
So,
and I think that's totally fine. Everybody has to do their own thing. This isn't a I suppose that's the idea of the estuary being church adjacent, because when you get into the formality of a church or something, or I often think about this within liturgy, and this is one of my big quotes where my priest is, he says you could look at Orthodoxy and you could say that it's very conservative, very structured, like they're not changing the liturgy because it's very conservative in that sense. But he says you have to ask what you're conserving, which is hospitality. And so then, like when you enter an Orthodox church, because I've even talked to my priest about having or hosting TLC kind of conversations, or for like a religious spiritual trauma group. And he was saying, like, I could probably do that if I wanted to in the church, but it would probably be in like potentially it could happen in the like sanctuary where the liturgy's held, but probably not. It'd probably happen in another building, because there's also nothing wrong with having spaces for particular things, like Rupert Sheldrake had a great podcast once talking about sacred spaces, and this is it's the kind of thing that I would be a big fan of, is like you can say that there is such a thing as like a sacred space, but that doesn't or something that's set apart, something that's sanctified, but that doesn't necessarily say that everything else is profane and everything else isn't sacred, or that God isn't present in other places, because of course he is. But like in the space of the church, you do certain things. In the altar, you do certain things. You wouldn't hold a TLC conversation behind a ikainostasis and like in the middle of the altar. That's just not the place for it.
Well, that's kind of again, we're talking about these value hierarchy of meaning and of sacredness, like just because you're in let's just use the word, the fellowship hall, next to the sanctuary, doesn't mean that place can't be made sacred for a AA meeting or a religious trauma meeting. You know what I mean? Like that, then you can make, but it's not, that space inherently isn't as sacred as the sanctuary and the altar, and I don't know what is the veil where the at the very behind the altar, what is that called?
Oh, just with the front wall?
Isn't there something covering up where the elements are prepared and stuff?
Well, I mean, at different times during the liturgy, that'll be covered with like a stole or something, and the, I don't know the term, or like the deacons will have it and they cover it. But there's always a covering. There's always these layers of covering. The iconostasis in general is representing that wall. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So the thing, I haven't taken the time, maybe I should have, to dig into your other randos and different things, but like, because I wanted to hear it from you. I wanted to have this conversation with you. Like, other people know it. I don't really know. I watched your Peter Enns thing you posted a few weeks ago about that conversation. And I think from that point you said you never went back to a Protestant church after that moment.
Nope.
What was leading up to that? What was your life like? We kind of talked about this off camera. You were in conservative, complementarian, Reform, Calvinist, Baptist, probably church or something. How did that journey work for you?
Oh man. So, all people can find more if they want it. The brief story. So I grew up on a cattle ranch in western South Dakota. My hometown had probably, it was bigger. It shrunk some. Probably had like 1,000 people, and I grew up about 6 miles outside of that. So like from my house, you couldn't see another house. It was just rolling hills, western South Dakota plains. It looked a lot like, I always tell people, just to get a visual image, if they've seen Dances with Wolves, like kind of where his homestead was, like that's where I grew up. I mean, that was filmed probably like 20 minutes from my house.
Oh, cool.
And it was I grew up pretty conservative, pretty poor. I mean, western South Dakota has its own vibe. It's funny. Like, and my parents were both really, they were very religious, especially my mom. My mom was the driver of it. I had a very, I don't know, on one hand, it was stable. On one hand, it was kind of a tumultuous upbringing. My dad had been married before, and so I have a half brother and half sister, and they came and lived with us probably like at kind of their middle school age when I was younger. I'm the youngest. And so there were all those dynamics that were a little interesting. We grew up really poor. I talk about like sharing bathwater because we were really in debt, just had nothing, kind of building up from nothing. If it's brown, flush it down. If it's yellow, let it mellow, kind of thing. And like literally pinching pennies, like that idea, that kind of poor, butchering deer on our kitchen table, growing a garden because we just didn't have money. And then by the time I was in high school, it's kind of middle class. Religiously, I mean, it's a hard upbringing. Like comparatively to most modern suburbanites, it was like the equivalent of homesteading. I mean, more or less. Like it was, just physically demanding, strained upbringing in that way. But my parents were relatively stable. My dad had been an alcoholic, but he was sober by the time I can even really remember. But still like a pretty gruff Marlboro man, Western South Dakota cowboy type thing. Like, I mean, there's lots of stories. Like my dad, I mean, not kidding, like riding horse, there'd be rattlesnakes. And I've seen my dad like take off his belt and like hit rattlesnakes over the head with like his belt buckle, and stuff. That kind of a guy. And so, and then my dad always worked multiple jobs, so that was very busy. We always went to church. I grew up with like Awana. I grew up in I suppose it was an evangelical free church, but it's just so rural South Dakota that even some of those doctrinal distinctives just don't matter or hold that much. I would have had no idea. It was very dispensational, very end timesy. I had like horror. I mean, I used to be terrified. I have nightmares all the time growing up with just like images of the mark of the beast and guillotine and fear of apostasy and all that.
You're telling my story to me basically, but keep going.
Yeah. And then in high school, I would say, like, I was just saying this the other day, just because my kids are teenagers now. I never had the mode of like arguing or not wanting to go to church, or not that I can remember. I think in high school, for some reason, we stopped going to church as much. We started going to a different church, and I can't remember why. There were just weird dynamics that I don't really understand from when we were young. But it was always like I was kind of a nerd for the time, academic for my small, I got affirmation for being able to get good grades and like, memorize the most verses in Awana. And I was quick with that stuff of like, so I always had that kind of affirmation. My mom really was very into her faith and Bible and like, who's the Kay, who does all those Bible studies? Beth Moore stuff. Yeah. I feel like there's some K too. I'm forgetting. She was always doing that stuff, marking up her Bibles, waking up early doing it. And so that was very much the culture. So I would always like be reading picture Bibles, knowing the Bible stories. So I was a nerd in that way. If my friends ever had like a Bible question, they would always like ask Luke type thing. And and then we went to like a Wesleyan kind of Methodist church in high school a little bit, and we were a little bit involved, not really involved, but it was always a part of our life. I was telling Chad, somehow rodeo came up last night, and I was saying my parents used to help out at this thing that was, I mean, this gives you an idea where I grew up. It was called Rodeo Bible Camp. So like a neighboring town, they would have this summer camp for kids where that was the bait and switch, is like, come, we'll teach you rodeo, and then, we give you Jesus or whatever. So I grew up with that, like every summer. I'm not being brief with this. I'll try to be more brief. And so then went to college, and I don't know, in high school and college, I would say I was living this kind of, in my terms, it was a very divided man mode. Is I identified as all these things, and this was all in my head, but at the same time, I wanted to party, I wanted to drink beer, I wanted to, I like girls a lot. And so I was trying to do all that stuff. It's very Enneagram 4, very like romantic, very emotional, like temperamentally, I'm basically like a female temperament. And so I was always trying to, I suppose a lot of the not being seen and not being loved and reciprocated in the way that I wanted with like childhood wombs, family dynamics, I was just seeking in like superficial intimacy with girls and partying and just basic hedonism. So I was doing all that in high school and college, but yet maintaining this religious identity. And in college that continued. I was doing like campus fellowship stuff, going to church all the time, but it was kind of like, you're in another town, and so you're just kind of picking your churches. It was always kind of Baptist-y, evangelical thing, but never the kind of meaty stuff that I ran into. So then my wife and we got married right after college, moved to Minneapolis, and that's when I don't know, there's just so many life transitions, so many different things going on, and I was like, okay, then I'm gonna make this hard break with. It's an easy transition. I can leave this kind of double life behind. I'm married now. Gonna try to live more consistently within all those things. And so we started church shopping around Minneapolis. But if you know anything about Minneapolis, particularly at the time, this is like 2005, it was very, I don't know, there's just a lot of things going on. So like there's Bethlehem Baptist with John Piper here. He was preaching through the book of Romans at the time, which was like a big deal for people in that world. It's like this classic moment. And then there's Greg Boyd is also in town here, who's like a prominent open theist. He has a big church, Woodland Hills. And I have all this background with like John MacArthur and just, I don't know, this smattering of stuff, but I have no way of really fitting it because I wasn't really exposed to any sort of academic Christianity at that point.
Yep.
Or more structured stuff. And nobody that knew any of those things. So I always say, when I came to Minneapolis, I was reading 2 books simultaneously. One was John MacArthur's Hard to Believe. And the other one was Letters from a Skeptic, which is this book that Greg Boyd wrote, essentially kind of like, I'm trying to think now, are they letters to his father, who was a skeptic, I think, and just talking through, and it's kind of this amalgamation of all these different letters. But they're just like, Greg Boyd, open theist. A lot of people think like that equates to liberal, but he's not really. He's actually pretty conservative in a lot of ways, and morally, I would say, but not theologically, whatever. And then MacArthur, who whatever people probably know MacArthur, and he's like a rigorist, very like the John MacArthur Study Bible. I've often joked, which I have and have read a lot. A lot of times there's more commentary than even the text. And the people who are familiar with MacArthur, like, it's kind of like Piper too. You take his words like as gospel, essentially. Yep. So those 2 books were weird. And I remember we went to Greg Boyd's church just to check it out. And I scheduled a meeting with Greg Boyd, and I got together with him, and I was just such a horn. And I remember talking to him. And for some reason at that point, like Calvinism seemed to resonate with me. And there are aspects of that still do. And I remember saying to him, like, we were just talking and I was explaining kind of where I was at and where I came from and just learning the terms like Calvinism, Arminianism, open theism. And I remember Greg Boyd asked me, he's just like, well, what do you think I am? And I was like, I don't know. I liked him. And I was just like, and Calvinist seemed to be right to me. And I was like, I don't know, Calvinist. And he's like, you haven't read my book, have you? And I was like, no, I have. But I just, I didn't.
You didn't have the tools at the time to see it.
Yeah, I didn't have any framing. And so I ended up at Bethlehem Baptist. We started going there on Saturday nights, but it's a big church, Piper's church. And I immediately liked Piper. I'd just never heard preaching like that. The dude he just like bleeds passion and earnestness. And you learn enough about him where like he's, pietism has its strengths and weaknesses like anything. There's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And so one of the things I learned about him, like he started desiring God. I ended up going to the church with a guy who founded Desiring God with Piper, actually. And he, I found out that he very early on, when he started writing books and things and started this foundation, he made a very intentional move to like not to have the money completely separate from him. Like he has no access to any of that money. When he sent his youngest daughter to school, to this private school, they took out like a second mortgage, which is weird because like Piper could be a multi-millionaire easily, and he's not. So I was like, yes, immediately. Love that. Fantastic. But like, that has its own, that can have its own mammon, right?
Your own pride of your piety.
Or like it in the same way that it appealed to me, like that can be a type of currency that appeals to someone like me. You're appealing to like zealous people, which I'm not accusing him of that, but like there's always,
Well, that's the
Christ
David Platt,
emphasized.
the David Platt radical, right?
Yeah.
That's
We read that book.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, but that even that idea, radical. Oh, this is what it means to
Yes.
be a
Totally.
true follower. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were trying to connect with people at that church. We were going all the time while he was preaching through Romans. I was just eating it up. And we went to this 20-somethings group as we were looking to be members, just trying to connect with people. And I met this guy, and his name's Oli. Shout out Oli, who was this. He and his wife, he's such a radical dude. I don't keep up with him that much anymore, probably because he thinks I strayed too far afield. But he had WDJD tattooed on the tops of both hands, like why did Jesus die? Always wore these hoodies, like gospel hoodies with whatever messages on them, and was big into like Ray Comfort, Kirk Cameron, street evangelism. And he and his wife had met at Bible school. He was an Alaskan halibut fisherman, and he and his wife met at Bible school in California. And for their honeymoon, they were either going to go to MacArthur's church or Piper's church. And so he was renting an apartment across the street for his honeymoon so they could just like go to as many Bethlehem Baptist things as they could. So I met this guy because after this guy who was speaking at this 20-somethings group gave a presentation, like me and Oli, of course, just like go to the front and like want to talk to him and have all these questions, and we immediately just hit it off. He like hugged me right away, just super passionate. We started hanging out, like doing Bible studies all the time, studying Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology together.
Yeah, that's another cornerstone for the
young
restless.
Doing street evangelism all the time.
Oh, wow.
And he turned me on to Sovereign Grace Ministries, which is basically like, it's basically in the young, restless, and reformed world. C.J. Mahaney, Joshua Harris. Although
I do their music a lot.
Yeah.
I like some of their music. Yeah,
that was a big distinctive of theirs, was their music for sure. And that's kind of their thing too, is that even though a lot of these young, restless, and reforms are continuationists or charismatic in their theology, Sovereign Grace is like,
they actually are.
Put our money where our mouth is. Like we're flying flags. We're doing prophecy. We're like, it was a big, and like I grew up essentially like without even knowing what it was, dispensationalist, cessationist, MacArthur kind of stuff. And so I remember the first time I went to that church, it was this weird thing of where it was smaller, it was so personable, it was warm. They're very like small group oriented. Like they take the person,
the community
very seriously, community big. And like Oli was just like, you gotta check this place out. He's like, Bethlehem's cool, but the worship is like off the hook over here. So we went, and I was immediately, and I was like, this is it. And so we started going to the Sovereign Grace thing. We'd still go to Bethlehem sometimes on like Saturday nights because we could. We were young and didn't have kids at that point. So we're just like, I mean, if you can go to church like if you can hear sermons, and I'm just listening to sermons all day, just listening to Keller sermons, listening to Driscoll sermons, listening to Matt Chandler sermons, listening to whoever, all these different guys.
The golden age of the
Gospel Coalition sermons. Like I listen to sermons the way I listen to podcasts now.
Yeah.
And I'd play them at work. It was obnoxious, like out loud, like on CDs. It was obnoxious. And like these girls would just be so pissed at me for doing it, and I'd just be like, "Sorry, you don't love the Lord." I was such an obnoxious, like early zealous, and then I rage stage Calvinist too. So, so we were there, and I don't know, but I've just always, to give you a flavor, like I've just kind of always been this way. Like it's a joke in my wife's family or my family, just like, where's Luke going to end up next? And I made a joke to him. I was like, when we became Orthodox with my wife's family, I was just like, who knows? I was like, 5 years, I may be Jewish. We'll see. It's like, I don't think that's true, because I think in Orthodoxy now I've found a place that, because, and I say this to my priest, because it's fundamentally a personalist faith. I think it is. And there's that stuff within Catholicism too, is like, you can simultaneously have all the rigor and the structure and the right way to do things, but it's not absolutized, but it allows you to just be wherever you are within that. It's just like there's always a right answer, but nobody's like, and I suppose you'd find this in more if you had a more conservative, temperamentally kind of fundy kind of a priest, he'd probably be more browbeating. But like in my church, it's not that way at all. Like everybody's very allowing and like it's a marathon, it's not a race, because people will convert all the time. And they'll be like, how do I do this fasting? Like, what are the rules? And people are like, well, and they're almost like even hesitant to give you an answer. Like they'll tell you or they'll give you resources, but then they're just like, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Like you can figure this out over time, and if you never get there, it's fine too, because of monasticism, I suppose a little bit, they think too is like there are people who dedicate their lives to like doing it right all the time and for intercessing for you and for praying. And so there are people that are doing it right all the time. It's their job. That is their vocation. And so like to the degree that you can do that in your secular lay life, fine. And some people do, but it's kind of like my priest said, even with the rich young ruler, the way that my priest explained the rich young ruler to me, it was very this, he comes to him and he says, what do I need to do to be saved? And Jesus is like, you have the scriptures, you have the rules, you know what to do. And he's like, well, I've done these since my youth. And he's like, okay, cool. The Jesus is essentially like, you're fine. But then the rich young ruler says, what do I lack? And so Jesus is like, okay, you want to step it up, sell all you have and give it to the poor. Like if you want more, there's more. It's not a prescription. You don't have to do it, because that's the personalist thing. There is like a right answer, but it doesn't form everyone in this identical replicationism to be the exact same thing. And even within monastics, it's not that.
Well, I think like, so I'm going to break in here and go and do a couple things. For one, I was raised very poor on a cattle farm in a town, 300 outside of a town of 1,000 or 10,000.
Yep.
Very dispensational. I had lots of fears and nightmares and went to bed crying a couple of times because of the mark of the beast and guillotines and fireside chats with my family about such things. Then, I got my undergrad in biblical studies, so I was a little bit more buttoned up in college, but my wife and I got married after college. And then, been on that journey. I was more into the rock and roll. So you were very, books and like knowledge person, like, that's just what you still are. Like, that's still like bringing a book out and like, let's talk about this idea from this, you know what I mean? That hasn't left you in that way, but it seems like to fast forward then to kind of where this last part of the conversation is that getting to orthodoxy allowed you to stop and take a breath when you'd been sprinting for about, I don't know what that timeline was, but
exactly. That's so keep going. Yeah. More.
Well, that's what it sounds like, was that you then were, I can just be okay to be myself and be okay to journey now and not
that's exactly what it was.
And I think that is beautiful. And I think you bring that into this space, allowing and realize, okay, this is actually, the thing that pushed me away from, other than like, I've told the story about kind of having this ego death, but the thing that pushed me also away from the Reformed side of things is the amount of certainty. Like, not that I don't have a deep faith, but that you have to attach a certain amount of certainty to all these things. And it's like, and then you're kind of stuck in this like...
Yeah. Or having to know what you think about everything. Because even in this little corner, I remember specifically having a conversation with Michael Lady, some of the early conversations that we were having about hell, because that's a big part of my story is the doctrine of hell stuff. And because that's the thing, is I always kept reading the books. Like I would read the prescribed books, the Jerry Bridges, the Radicals, the whatever Al Mohler books, whatever I was supposed to be reading. I would read all those books, D.A. Carson. exegetical fallacies. Like I'd read all the nerdy books, going through R.C. Sproul stuff. He walked through philosophy. All that stuff was very formative for me. But then I was also reading other books. I would read like Brian McLaren, A New Type of Christianity. I would read Blue Like Jazz. I would read Rob Bell. I would read, I read Kevin DeYoung, two guys who aren't emergent, but who should be, or whatever that name of that book is. I can't remember. So I was always reading all these things, but then I would want to talk to I would talk to everybody about all the, right doctrine. Then I talk about all this other stuff too. And circling back to hell in these conversations, I remember, so to put another exclamation point on the point you just made, Father John Baer came and lectured at Anselm House, this local Twin Cities, University of Minnesota, well, it's not interfaith, but inter-Christian fellowship on the University of Minnesota campus. Because again, like there, you don't have you can't be super dogmatic and exclusivist because it's the University of Minnesota campus and nobody gives a shit about any of that stuff. So you have to be kind of open and inclusive. The blessings and the curses of majority culture stuff. But I didn't even know who John Baer was at the time. And my priest actually gave me a ride to the school. So I was riding to school with like a deacon, my priest, and John Baer. And he was just kind of asking me who I was because I wasn't Orthodox at the time. And I said something like that, is like, I was trying to explain my journey to Orthodoxy and why I was inquiring and what I found there. And he said, and my priest just kind of put words on it. He's like, you found freedom, essentially the place to be. I felt like I could breathe. And what I mean by that is like, I didn't have to figure out, this has been a recurrent thing. Michael said this exact thing. And I want to illustrate it by a conversation that we had, is like, I felt the peace to not have to know what I thought about everything. I didn't need to know, what do I think about this doctrine and this, which the exclusivist religion on the right side of history, which line are you on, this side or this side? Are you on the right side or the wrong side? And depending which tribal camp you're in, like if you're on this side, you're dead to me. If you're on this side, you're okay and you're right, which is all bullshit anyhow, really. Because like, is your self-awareness so accurate that you really know what you think? The Jordan Peterson thing. And because we started having these conversations about hell, and Michael, he admits, not that he's dishonest, but he kind of came to the self-awareness that he was scared to death to even be open to rethinking hell and to saying what he thought about it. But like, people don't understand that kind of fear, that driving fear, has nothing to do with what you actually think about a topic. So like, it's how
it's more social, because you're talking about that exclusivist line.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so this fear can be a corrupting, self-deluding thing that makes you, because I've often said, like, there's a big difference between believing you ought to believe something and actually believing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you actually believe it. A lot of that has to do with tribal boundary policing and fear. If I think this thing, if I allow myself to think this thing, not only will I be ostracized by certain groups, but maybe God won't love me anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a limit to that, because, like, so my father-in-law, I told you earlier, he's a physician, very, smart guy. He likes to study things, he likes to adamatize things, he likes to get down.
Yeah.
But he's not doing it because he wants someone else to think. I think he himself. And so and I think that where the limits that I'm talking about is like, he's thinking about his, the worldview thing. So it's like trying for himself to stay in a world, like, how do I stay in this? And it is propositional, and we've been having that conversation, but at the same time, I think that's the limit to where, for him, it's far less about a community thinking this, he's thinking right about this, and he's trying to that journey, and you do rub up, then you do come into the boundaries. Well, what does make me a Christian? Like that, like, is there a propositional thing that like, that's the boundary that he would say he's coming up against, I think. Now, I know you would say that differently, but I'm saying that versus everything is just a tribal, like, I think there is a lot of that. I think there's plenty of that.
So I would say within what makes up a person is it's all these nested dolls of unities of multiplicities, really. And because what you are is I would argue, I mean, I'm going to argue like a relational ontology without going into that, but like what you are is a unity, a singularity of a bunch of relations with whatever, with time, your family, your culture, your language, your body, your mind. It's all of these things. And those are nested within bodies, other bodies. Like your family is a body, your community is a body, your state is a body. Those are all just different layers of, and those are all unities of a multiplicity that are single. Really, this is like this revelation that I had when I was listening to Sam Tiedemann talk to whatever that Catholic guy the other day when he was talking about divine simplicity, and I'm like, that's actually how God is one. He doesn't have parts. That's divine simplicity, but everything is. Like this is my argument for like the Mosaic Vision. Does a mosaic have parts? Does a unity of all these multiplicity, does it have parts? Only in analysis. Like you can only break a thing apart through vivisection, through analysis. But in reality, it's one.
Right.
Just like God, it's one. It's a unity. And so what you're saying is like there's all these layers. So like I would say for your father-in-law or whatever.
Yeah.
There are people who have certain temperaments, part of their multiplicity, who are
Enneagram
very
5,
analytical,
probably.
left-brained.
Yeah.
They want to figure all that stuff out. And I do too. Like that's why I'm reading all these books. Like I do want to know what I think about all these issues, which is fine. But the problem with propositional tyranny and lopsided left-braindism is you want to somehow stake part of or all of what it means to be saved based on this propositional tyranny, which I would argue, and especially how it relates to time and your own embodiment in the world, because the point is to live everything. The point is actual holiness, grace, and grace and works, having that distinction and with the propositions is like, I would argue very hard that most people stake, and for lack of a better way to say it, way too high of a percentage based on propositional fidelity.
Yeah. There was I tweeted, I can't remember the guy's name. Jordan Hall was on his podcast, or it showed like 2 days ago. Man, I'd have to look it up. But when Jordan, this guy was kind of talking to him and trying to get him to see, talking about right belief in a way.
Yeah.
And this guy is, if he is a Christian, it's kind of hard to tell where he's coming from. But Jordan said the value of proposition is very light. And then he goes on to talk about the other parts that you're talking about, holiness, right life, works and stuff. And I thought that was a great illustration of that idea.
Yeah, I completely agree more. One way that I've often thought about it, and this hasn't caught on, so maybe it's not that popular or I don't stress it enough or it's not true, is that propositions are potency. That's all they are. They're not, but the point of Christianity, it's not that potency doesn't matter, but actuality matters. Incarnation matters. Being matters. Actual holiness. What does it mean to love orphans and widows? That's holiness. That's righteousness. And so like you can sit around and say, St. Paul, go and be well fed and well dressed. If you don't do anything, it doesn't matter. And this is where in Orthodoxy and Catholicism and I've had conversation with Chezi and Yosef about this, and like Judaism, there is no, those two things, like that multiplicity of dividing thought from act, like doesn't even exist in the older strains of Christianity.
I've been hitting on this. This has been the way that you said that there's not a distinction. That is a huge.
There's a distinction without division. That's what I would say. Well, you can make a distinction.
Yes, but. I mean, what people say that about Luther or something. And this is where we're now, and that wasn't true because their worship was very sacramental. It was there were other things they were doing that were a part of their faith. But you strip that down and you take Luther's theology to a Protestant or a Baptist, and they map that back onto things he's saying. then it becomes complete intellectual assent. Almost everything. If you say it's only the word of God, well, is that what Luther was doing?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
it wasn't. That wasn't what he was doing.
And this is what happens with times. You know how I'm talking about all that nested stuff and how these things work in time? So in the bigger body group, what I would argue is the idea, the seed that I would argue goes back into the Latin Church and then manifested in the Reformation and Luther and all those things. That, for that body, was a potency. That idea, that separation started as a potency. And over the course of 500 years in time, this is the other side of this. The ideas matter.
Yes.
Like, I'm not anti-ideas. I'm not anti-left brain. I'm not anti-mapping, because those things do matter.
Yeah, they do.
That idea and that seed led to me in high school and college self-identifying as a Christian, having it be this central part of my life while I was getting drunk and trying to hook up with girls all the time.
Right. Yes. Because
that potency led to that actuality. It mattered.
This was the conversation I had yesterday. Gosh, who was I talking to? I was talking to this guy I met at Symbolic World, and he's a worship pastor at a church in Idaho. His name's Iris. He started a YouTube channel a few days ago, and I was telling him, I feel like if substitutionary atonement or the Great Exchange is agreeing to that belief, it almost, nihilism's not the right word for that, but it creates, and you're not attached to Eucharist, if you're not attached to a doing even in worship, it's just, well, I have this doctrine. And then, but how do you attach that to something real? Because because all your sin is on the cross. It's actually not a part of you anymore, almost.
Right. Well, and this is what,
and that's the personal incarnation that you're talking about, yes. Even sin.
No, I agree. That's it. Kind of. So I'm going to be going and visiting my parents again around Easter, and this happened the last time we were down there for Western Easter, and I don't, I think I'm only gone to evangelical church with my parents since I became Orthodox. Like, I haven't gone back for any reason. I just go to my church, but and every once in a while I'll go to my wife's church, which isn't Orthodox, when we visit them. But so they had communion. I mean, I don't know. They had good communion on the Good Friday service, which I don't know, doesn't really make sense to me. But and I was caught. I wasn't prepared for it, and I didn't, because I hadn't thought about it beforehand, and so I didn't really know what to do. And it was this weird moment of, oh shoot, what do I do? And I didn't want to offend my mom. I didn't want to, and the pastor very explicitly said, like, he made the point to just be like, there's nothing special about the juice and the bread. It's a sign, it's the difference between a sign and a symbol. It's just merely a pointer. It doesn't mean anything. It's like, the A in the alphabet has no connection to anything in the real world. It's just merely an abstraction. It's just a sound, and the symbol A, I mean, you could call it a symbol, but it's not really a symbol because it's just a sign. It just means this sound. There's nothing in that has any connection. McLuhan talks about this with like object ground separations, but whatever. And so the pastor said that, and then I was just thinking like, oh shoot, what do I do? And it was coming fast. And so I looked at my mom and I was just like, should we go? And she, very, very Protestant answer. She's like, well, it's up to you, your decision, kind of. And I was like, crap, that doesn't help me at all. I turned to my daughter and I said, what do you think? Should we go up? And she was just, this daughter, she's so great. She was just like, I don't think she wanted to, but then also kind of out of the mouth of babes, she was just like, why would we go up? He just said there's no point. He just said there's like nothing in it. So why would I go do it? Like, who cares? Like, go or don't go. It doesn't matter. And so we didn't go up, and it made, and I'm connecting that to like the idea of a sacramental world where it's beyond this either or of the divided world. Like Father Stephen Freeman wrote this book called The One Story Universe, where, natural, supernatural, spiritual, material, we think of these things as like separate. And that's fine. You can have a distinction, but again, a distinction without a division, because the lines between those and which precedes and gives birth to the other and how does it work in this emanating emergent thing, like who knows? And so, but with something like penal substitutionary atonement, what I would argue, to throw the big terms on it, is it leads to a kind of nominalism and kind of almost a Gnosticism where
that's what I was trying to
leads into a kind of pantheism, because who am I in this equation? You don't exist. You have no existence in penal substitutionary atonement.
You are an assent. You are a mental assent to that.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, your body doesn't matter because your works are filthy rags. They don't matter. They have nothing to do with Christ, because it's all about Christ as distinct from you, not Christ in me, not filling up what's lacking in Christ's affliction.
And
just Jesus.
I told this story the other day. So I was a pastor at this kind of interdenominational, we were attracting all sorts. And the guy who came in became my best friend there. He'd been evangelical, then he married Catholic, and he had a fallout with a relationship, and that led him into the Catholic Church and met his wife there. And we were in my father-in-law, we were doing the great courses. Do you know those great courses, the DVD series and stuff, the great, he does those all the time. He used to, he hasn't in a while, but he wanted to do a study over Martin Luther because he was in the Lutheran church at the time, and he invited his pastor and some of his Baptist friends and some of his friends of church, and he invited me, and he invited Seth, my friend, who was had been Catholic, but he was going to our evangelical church. And Seth would tell me things, the way that he would approach scripture. He was approaching life sacramentally, and I didn't quite understand it. And of course, like, my in-laws believed in the sacraments, but they were culturally evangelical at that. Like, so it was like this kind of odd thing. And so then Seth would just talk to me about all this incarnational stuff in life. So we're sitting in this study listening to Martin Luther, and we get to this guy, or about Martin Luther's life, and we get to, someone brings up, my works are like, menstrual rags. I mean, that's, and he's, that's just what it is. And everyone's kind of ticking the box. Yes, yes, yes. And I'm just like, I don't know. And they get to my friend, he just goes, and we're the youngest guys there. Everyone's in their 50s or something, 60s. And my friend Seth, she's just like, I don't know, guys. There's just something about that, the work that God does in a person, in us, in you, in me, like, those things are true, but they can go away. They can melt. And there's what is left in our life as Christians is what is good, the good work that God is doing in us. And he's like, I have this like image of, like stuff melting away, and there's something gold left. Mm-hmm. And I just was sitting there like next to him, and I was just like, what the hell is, I think I believe he's talking, but I'm like, and that stuck in my brain. That just stuck in my brain forever. And now I have had this, in my own form of it, incarnational faith and experience that's where those doctrines rub up against. And I don't think they would have rubbed up against even in Protestantism 500 years ago, because it's so tightly bound to the other parts of the culture or the practice of the church. But like I said, 500 years later, and if you bring those things into Baptist, like this very low stripped down of visual meaning, of physical meaning, that's all you have is these assents, these doctrines. Yep. And like I said, it's well, I believe this, but if I can just get the right beliefs, then my life will make sense. Yeah. And it does. I'm not going to, it didn't work for me.
Yeah. And I don't know, but like what I would want to say too is like, there's truth in that thing. And there's like, everything's relative, but not arbitrary, I like to say. So like, it's not the kind of Protestant Reformation and what they were clapping back against and fighting against was a legitimate thing, because in indulgences, the kind of idea, the thing, it wasn't arbitrary, right? This spirit that emerged, that really took the, like, your works are filthy minstrel rags, was because that's your sacrifices are abhorrent to me. They burn my nose. That's because that's what that had become. The sacrifice itself had been bastardized and become mammon. It's all mammon. It's all mammon, Tom Luke. And because it was. And so, like, but then, somewhat you can go out of the frying pan and into the fire, and then it led to where we were now. But yet, I don't think that is so simultaneously a distinction without division. I can criticize aspects of the Protestant Reformation, what has happened, and where we've led to now with this kind of weird and strangely enough, this kind of nominalistic anti-incarnational Christianity, which just doesn't make sense. It's like an oxymoron. But that doesn't mean that there's not good things in it, and doesn't mean that there's not truth in it. But it took that long, like the thing you're describing, where people are rediscovering symbolic meaning and sacramentality. So that bigger body, it took 500 years for us to soften from that reaction against the thing, to recover what was good and what was lost, and the baby that we threw out with the bathwater. You know what I mean?
Well, I would also say that in parts of mainline Protestantism, there still can be very sacramental theology in life and practice. What I'm actually saying, and I think you and I actually, this was more of our experience as coming from, and I'll specifically say Baptist, because even if, like you were saying, you went to this E-Free church or whatever, but for all intents and purposes, it was Baptist. Or, so like, and that can go, oh, we're non-denominational, but doctrinally, we're Baptist. That it's like all over the place.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You take these solas in a way and you map them onto that. They weren't operating off the solas necessarily when the Baptist church they had different reasons. They had to baptize. It was more about the sacraments than it was about the solas, actually. And so if you now bring those back on to a strip down from things having symbolic and actual sacred and spiritual reality, it's kind of a problem. That's what I'm saying is, and I think where American evangelicalism / Baptist, there's a problem with it being just beliefs, but because the fear of works righteousness, the fear of that has then that's where the nihilism comes in, because I can't do anything, so why bother? But as long as I have this belief, then I'm okay. But then it creates an incredible amount of dissonance in your life.
Oh man. Yeah, I've never thought about nihilism being connected to kind of an unconscious Protestant fear to works righteousness.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, no, that resonates huge. I mean, I just never connected those dots before, because that was, whether or not you're, like, I was speaking to some inquirers at church who were kind of Calvinist Baptist-y, and like they're just coming with the whole family because they just can't do it anymore, checking it out. And because they were talking about all that, how all their kids, it was just so hardcore, like all their kids are just falling into this kind of essentially nihilism because they're wondering about their own salvation and election and making their calling and election sure. And how can you ever really know? You can't. Like, it's completely arbitrary, because then you'll say fruit, but how do you know? How do you know you'll endure to the end?
Well, and how do you know? But if you can do nothing good,
right?
If all my works
what are your good fruits if you can do nothing good?
If all my works are as minstrel pads, I'll keep it a little lighter. So then what is the point? It's just an ascent to get into heaven. But then it's like, well, and then at what point that gets knocked over, a proposition gets knocked over, and then it's just like, well, damn.
And this is where we would affirm too, like it's annoying to me that you even have to say this, but part of this is because people are so damn tribal, honestly. There are Christians in Protestantism. Like, this doesn't mean that all Protestants aren't Christians, because here's the grace of God, is because despite the fact that you think you believe all those things, you can't live that way in the world. And so you really do love people, and you really do good works, and you really do manifest Christ in you, despite your shitty theology.
Well, I mean, I have my dearest friends are, it's not that I think you can develop spiritual practices that are actually incarnational, whether or not you think they are or not. You know what I mean? And so, like, that's where the life comes from. But it's that you can't say that, or kind of believe it. But people will, like, and this is a little different because Tim Keller wasn't, he was a Presbyterian. So, but when recently, before he died, he was on Carrie Nieuwhof's podcast like a few months before he died, and Carrie asked him, like, how did you make it? And he basically said, reading the Psalms every day for the last 25 years, or 50 years, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
That ritual and that personal liturgy and that personal work, that's what he pointed to. So, but we can't
grace, it's all the same thing.
But we can't say that because is that what got me into heaven, was reading Psalms every day? Like, there's a nihilism there it's not, everybody doesn't experience it, but.
Well, that's just the thing. But that is the symbolic worldview, right? And Vervaeke, I mean, if you want the intellectual stuff, go and listen to Bishop Maximus and Vervaeke in that series where they talk about emanation and emergence, because they lay it out intellectually very clearly. And it's Vervaeke coming at it from a cog-sci scientific, philosophical perspective. And then basically at the end, like, what happens is Bishop Maximus is like, yeah, that's basically just incarnational theology. That's just like Orthodox theology. But because that is the thing, grace and works. And you can make the distinction, but it's like what I said before. It's divine simplicity. Those things are one, though. The grace is manifest in the work as one. They don't exist separately.
And I don't think that people. So what my criticism isn't that people that are Protestant evangelicals don't believe that. But
they do believe that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They do, and they assent. Well, it's not. We have to have works are a fruit of God's work in our life. Like, that is a reality in that faith. But because works are only a sign of Christ in your life. They're only a sign. They aren't a real part of Christ in your life. To go back to what we were talking about with Eucharist.
I think that's right. But then, I think that's right. But then this is where I like, and I don't know, we don't have to go here, but this is where I always like to talk about ontology so much, because if they're merely a sign, and this is where I think that kind of theology collapses into a kind of pantheism, which pantheism and panentheism are hard to describe, because if it is an actual symbol, then it's Christ's work in your life. If it's merely a sign, then it's merely a pointer. But then I say, how does that exist? How does the sign exist? I don't think you can explain it to me, because ultimately I think you have to collapse into, this is where I've talked about this shit forever, but like, it's monism. You either have a monism or you have dualism, which is like some kind of, I don't even know what an example would be. I don't think they work, of like Gnosticism, where there's like God up here and then a demiurge, it's a separate thing, but it's ultimately some kind of bad good duality. Or you have some kind of Trinitarianism, which is really more like a yin yang Tao. It's like it's a relational reality, because like a hard monism, which is like a hard pantheism, it's nonsense. It's like there's nothing but that. There's nothing but the one. And so everything else is just really illusion and collapses into the one, because there is only one. There can't actually be being or anything other than the one. It's just the one. And if you have a dualism, and really that's some kind of dynamic thing, unless you want to say it's all illusion. So like then it's like a dynamic relational monism, which is really like more of like a Trinitarian theology. If you have a hard dualism, it's nonsense because there's no even context. Like if you have two hard circles that are completely single, you're assuming the implied background, which allows you to even distinguish between the two. So like that has no ontology either. And so you have to, like, this is what I've always said. Like, I still to this day do not understand like a hard reformed penal substitutionary atonement. This is to get back to the sign thing. I don't understand the ontology because if it's merely a sign, how does it exist? This is the conversation I tried to have back on Rando so long ago. I think it's called like what art man that thou art mindful of him. That's how Jeff titled it. But it was a riff on the POS theology, and I was just like, how does man exist? If you think man is completely separate from God, how does it exist? Because in him we live and move and have our being. All being is in God. It's kind of like that mystical idea of God is whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere, or however that Western mystic said it. You can't, because if it's merely a sign, there's no God in it. It's just chaff. It disappears. And then in the end, when God is all in all and everything that isn't God has been diminished, then all that's left is Jesus, but not you in him in some kind of mystical way, just Jesus and God, because all you and your filthy rags and all the signs is just gone. It's just chaff. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. And sorry, that was probably, like we always say, like the really intellectual stuff. I'm interested in that stuff and I like to talk about it and I think about it, but like it doesn't even matter for most people because it's just like it's too out there.
But things flow downstream though from things flow downstream from what you believe, and that we'll bring this into the sphere. Is so Jordan Peterson, do you believe in God? Well, I want to live as if I do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe in the real presence of the Eucharist? As Christian Baxter, I want to worship as if I do. Because I think that I'm not going to say I know, but I want to worship as if I do, because if you put that as a higher point of a meaning on a value hierarchy, what comes down from that is attention and a focus that's more towards something that is not you, but you are a part of this and you are entering into a relationship with this, and that's from like a
Right.
worship leader perspective. And I don't know how to like get that all the way down to the ontology of being that you're talking about, but I think that to talk about the thinky talky, the idea space, is that at the same time, what you believe matters, but it doesn't matter to check a box. It matters for where are you going to put your attention, and how then that then causes you to operate in your being in this world, maybe like something like that. And
the actual holiness, I often say to my son, I'll often use this, but it's the sons in the vineyard. Like I'll talk about that one where the son, the father asks him to go work, and the one's like, yeah, I'll go work. And he doesn't. And then the other son's like, no, I'm not going to go, but he ends up going. And then Jesus says, which one of these two was approved? The one who actually did it. like that's what actually matters at the end of the day, is not, or again, it's like, go be well fed and well dressed, and you do nothing. It's dead. It's empty words. It's despirited breath. You've divided your words are no longer representative like God's of pure act, where your words actually manifest in the world, because that's the goal. That's what God does. Speak and there's light. Let there be light. Boom, there's light. I believe this. Boom, it should be then. And if it's not, you're a liar and there's no truth in you.
Because if you don't, and I'm trying to connect this. I don't know if so you can say you don't believe that in sacraments, in that there is a true reality to something spiritual and something incarnational happening in a baptism or in confession or in marriage or in the Eucharist or something. Okay, so I say I don't believe that because that's just turns into idols.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, you still are gonna believe. You are gonna turn something else. Go into Keller. You're gonna turn something else into an idol, and it's probably the person with the microphone because there's nothing else left.
Yeah, all the ideas or whatever. Yeah, just because you can err on this side and you can make. I mean, it's kind of the same argument that's been happening lately about iconography or whatever. There's been a few conversations about iconography, and it's like, can you turn an icon into an idol? Well, sure, you can. You can turn anything into an idol. So,
yeah,
like,
that's
not an
that's what
argument
I'm
against
saying.
icons. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying is like, oh, so we didn't make a certain contingent of people don't make John Piper and a pope. Like, don't make, you know,
Pope.
He's Chad's.
Because Chad is Pope.
What do you?
You're maybe not privy to that information. There was a big movement for a long time. Everybody was just joking around, like, make Chad Pope.
Oh,
Chad the alcoholic. So that's. Yeah.
But I'm saying we will. So why not make? I don't know if this is good. Why not make the Eucharist an idol? Because at least, like, I don't like. At least that's not. At least you're saying I'm making Christ an idol.
Well, and people have historically, because like even when, like in the Orthodox Church, when you take communion, afterwards they have this stuff, friendship bread, where it's tradition where you go afterwards and there's pieces of bread and then like a little cup of wine that you take. Yeah. And part of the reason I've heard, at least this is what I've been told, of why that happened is because people were smuggling out pieces of communion and then using it in like a magical way to like try to heal their livestock or whatever, you know, and people are like, no, you need to eat it, you know, and so then they created this other, because that's turning it into because that's actually taking, I mean, quite literally, that's taking God and turning it into mammon. That's what you're doing when you do that. You're using it to accomplish your will, not God's will, you know, which is just like the opposite of Christ, not my will, but your will.
And so I don't know. I mean, I the frame that I come at a lot of this is from the practice of like gathered worship, because that's what I spent almost 15 years thinking, and even after that I was still thinking about it, just wasn't doing anything about it. That if we strip all of that away, all the what it's built on, like the being, if we strip what the being of worship is away from sacraments, we replace it with other things that we will make sacramental, and that turns into people. We will make them our holy representation. We will make Mark Driscoll our holy representation of that, and the preaching of the word is our sacrament. Well, you can't touch the preaching of the word, but you can touch Mark Driscoll. Do you know you can't? We will make the music that, you know, the worship. If worship then is only music because you don't have any other sacraments, we will touch Hillsong United or Chris Tom. Like, we will make them our sacrament. Because we can touch, because they are an incarnate being. We will touch them, and we will look to them for that meaning in our life.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. I think it's essentially like, because we are fundamentally, you know, this heaven and earth. The meeting of heaven and earth is what a man is, which is a sacrament, which is a symbol. You have to make, because we are both of those things, if you lose this part of it, this part of the symbol, the sacrament, the emergent thing, the material thing, the embodied thing, you're gonna make it something. You can't just live up here.
Yeah, and that's why I think that it's unconscious, because it doesn't fit into the theology. There's not even words. There's not actually words for it, but it's happening.
Yeah. No, I agree. I completely agree. Can we pause? I have to go to the bathroom, and I want to be able to focus.
Okay. Yeah. paused.
Okay, we're paused.
I'll just edit it out. Yeah, you're cool.
Okay. Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
All right, it's all right. I
Sorry
want
to make you edit.
Yeah, it's all right. I want to shift the conversation because we're just like going. I want you to talk about what you see from your perspective as more of a veteran for sure than me. What's been going on? Let's do the navel gaze. Like, so that's because I mean I called Chad the other day when I was watching some stuff because my context is so limited. I you know, like literally like 2 months. Like, but because of my intensity of listening to the key players, like it's not like these things are foreign to me, but the kind of subculture underneath, like how have you, what's your perspective on the last, I don't know, several months or I don't know, of this little corner of the internet, the TLC, blah, blah, blah.
So, Chad and Neil and I spoke about this a little bit last night, and I've been thinking about this a lot, like Christian YouTube versus TLC type stuff. Chad was saying last night, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, that like the navel gazing is inevitable and it's going to happen. It's okay, but he's kind of tired of it. He just wants what he wants people to do is just stop, because it's almost like, so you know who the way I'll illustrate is this Abigail Schreier, who wrote that book. Like she's on Rogan, she's popular. She wrote that book called what the heck's the name of her book? But it's about trans kids, and it's basically how it's just destroying girls. But she has a new book about therapy and kids, and how essentially kids going to therapy isn't really making them well. It's just making them more neurotic and self-focused. Because part of what therapy is, and it's connected to AA, is you think about yourself and you talk about yourself a lot to deal with your problems. But if your problem is self-centeredness and self-focus, and then you just go in there and talk about yourself a lot, like it's not necessarily a good thing. And I think she deals with more of like the statistics of it, is like maybe there's all these more kids going to therapy and doing therapy, and kids are not getting healthier.
Yeah. Well, maybe from this perspective. So me as a what would you want somebody like me who's been involved in this a couple of months to know? That would be something like that are good. I don't know if that makes sense. That to frame it a little bit more, not just a general,
positively. Yeah. So what I would say is, to me, and Paul's really been leaning into this, and this has been one of my drums since the beginning, TLC is about people. It's not about ideas. Now, there are ideas. We talk a lot about ideas.
We just spent like 30 minutes talking about ideas.
But also it's about people, because it's about testimony. It's about story. I mean, we started off with me talking about my life. You're talking about personal stuff in your life. But that's a distinction that I think that thing is a distinction that Christian YouTube doesn't have and doesn't do, is it's not personal. It's not testimonial. Like and Sam and I have talked about this, is that he's trying to blend the two and almost influence Christian YouTube by doing that. And you can do that better or worse, so you can have better conversations. But a lot of those conversations within Christian YouTube are like new media conversations. Paul's video about that today, with like even Jordan Peterson being like essentially a host, where he just has all these hosts, all these people come in and they go through the circuit. They like talk to Chris Williamson and Ruben and Jordan Peterson and Rogue, and then they're just on a circuit, and it's the new media.
That was a part of that movie review that movie review that I did yesterday. That was kind of that was a point in there. In the movie.
So I would say TLC is not broadcast TV 2.0 or new media or just about ideas. Yes, we do all that, but it's also incredibly personalist. It's about people. And that's what I would say is really big in TLC. And the bigger it gets, the more it'll get lost, because there's hierarchies and things. But I've really always ever been here for the people and the relationships. It's that commonality of, we couldn't find anyone else to talk to about these things. But then it's not just talking about the things. It's not just like a thought group. It's not just because the estuary component, and because of the dropping of the confessional walls, and because there is no thought policing in that way, you can't make it into a policing thought group thing. People will try to do that, but then they just end up leaving because they get annoyed.
Yeah, and
they can't control it.
So you posted about Father Young and talking to Ortland.
Yeah.
Gavin.
Yep.
And it is like, we're going to get on here and we're going to talk about the old story of Protestantism versus Orthodoxy. That's all we're going to talk about. But what would be more interesting is if Gavin Ortland and Father DeYoung talked about each other's lives, talked about their families a little bit, talked about how they got to where they were, and built a relationship.
Because that's highlighting, I think, a deeper ontological thing than this propositional tyranny.
Yeah,
if you keep it in idea space all the time, whether or not you'll acknowledge in your Sunday school answer that, we shouldn't be left-brained and it's not just about the ideas. Bullshit. You're deluding yourself. You still think it is because that's all you're talking about.
Right. And so that's what I think. If it, like, when I think about what makes something like what you've talked about with Christian YouTube or something, is like, and you this is the point that you brought back. And so I then mapped that onto that recent conversation. I watched part of it, and it was like, well, let's talk about the solas versus Orthodoxy, which is, we've already talked about on this podcast too. But it's like, I was like, well, it would have been so much more interesting because for the personal knowing of these people, like, and to say, okay, because that argument is 500 years old, and granted, but the things that people aren't dying for that stuff anymore, like for those ideas. People might still die for Christianity, but not like, but that was what Tim said, who doesn't even call himself a Christian, on that Grail Country thing that you did the other day.
Yeah.
He basically said, I would die for this.
Yeah.
Like, that's interesting. But he's not dying for Orthodoxy. He's not dying for Lutheranism. He's not dying, like,
for any of the particular little camps or tribes.
Yeah. And so there's that point. But then also, so what I've experienced is, so I start doing this thing, and then there's like a lot of attention. And then I'm like, oh, let's get, and then, I talked to Jordan Hall. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I felt all this, you heard me talk about it. I felt the intensity of that. And so, and Hezi was like, who's next? Jordan Peterson and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, what do I do? Because then I go to Symbolic World and I meet famous YouTubers, and everybody's there. And I'm like, I actually met Christian YouTubers. You're not on Twitter, are you?
No.
So I did all this on Twitter, which was Ruslan and John from What Do You Mean were there. They were at the end of the conference.
I don't know the second one, but
What Do You Mean? He's done a lot of apologetic stuff. Okay. Pretty big, probably like 500,000 or 800,000 subs. And they come the last day and they're sitting there. They go to a dinner with Peugeot and they do their whole Tomada thing with John Hears.
Yeah.
So, but those are two big time Christian YouTubers. So I'm like, oh, I want to go talk to them. Maybe I can have a conversation with them. And then it's like, people start reaching out to me. Someone makes a YouTube the other day called like Becoming Human. And this guy was there and he mentions my name, that he saw me. It seemed like Christian was connected to this stuff and to the people, because I had done this. I got on Grail Country and I've had interactions with Grimm and so, you know what? Those conversations with him, and then with this guy I just talked to yesterday, Aries, he was a pastor, and we were both there, but he emails me and is like, I need somebody to talk to about this stuff.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point of even me starting this channel. Is like, that is actually I've got to lean into that. I've got to keep leaning into that. And then the other guy, I posted that bootleg copy of of that section of Jordan Peterson at the conference. And a guy emails me and he's like, I looked at your channel and stuff. He's like, and the guy, Edge of Thought, the guy that I talked to was yesterday. Those are, and I get that example. I was given that example from you. I was given that example from Paul. I was given that example from Chad. Is like, someone comes up in the stream, Luke's going to talk to him. It doesn't matter who the hell they are. Those examples, they taught me, and they got into my brain about this.
So this is what this really is for me. I've been thinking about this more recently, and I mean, it's a Christianese word, but like it truly is. It's not even intentionally. It's just deeply ingrained in me. It's discipleship. And I think discipleship happens through mimesis and osmosis. I think you see the thing, and there's something deeply within you that resonates. It may not even be intellectual. It's like admiration, respect, love, trust, faith, whatever. And then like begets like. I think that's how this works. And that's been the pattern, starting all the way back with PVK and all of us in the PVK sphere, which is really the hub of TLC. I mean, people talk about Jordan Peterson and Peugeot, but like it's happening around PVK.
It's downstream from that, but that is not how it coalesced.
The spirit of TLC is a very PVK thing, and it's about reaching down, like Chad said. Chad said this last night in the thing, so it'll come out in our talk, but he said he heard somewhere essentially like masculine relational dynamics tend to like reach across and up. Mm-hmm. And he said feminine tend to reach across and down. And I think the spirit of TLC is that's something we've talked a lot about since the very early days. Like there's a feminine hospitality to it. And why am I blanking on his name now? I haven't talked to him in forever, but like one of the early guys who started the Discord with Joey, was a local guy in Paul's group. This early days. He's not even around. He's not even on here anymore. His name will come to me eventually. I haven't interacted with him forever because he's gone and he's married and doing other things. But he said religious institutions have become, what do you say? He said they become masculine spaces with feminine language where they should be feminine spaces with masculine language. And I think that's what we're recovering. Like that's the really big 30,000 foot view picture here, because there's nothing wrong with having ideas. There's nothing wrong with having left brain things. There's nothing wrong with having intellectual conversations. But what TLC models and disciples, I think, is feminine hospitality. Mm-hmm. Like I'll talk to anybody. I don't care who you are. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to boot you out. Like you are welcome. What are we conserving? We're conserving hospitality. Yeah. And that's what TLC is. And I think just like you talking to people who have no one else to talk to is great, because I would argue the Christian YouTubers or the people that are on the status or who have conversations with people all the time. So stick with me for a while. This is like what Paul was talking about this morning in his video. And I'm eventually going to stop watching YouTube things for Lent. Sorry.
Good. That's cool.
It's an addiction.
Yeah, but, it is.
So he was talking about JBP's conversation with Bishop Barron, and he was saying it was better, but he said it's a little bit of, it's better than a lot of the JBP stuff of recent, but he said it's still like a hosting thing. And that's what Christian YouTube ends up doing. Like it stops being relational. It stops being fun. It stops being bound. Like your broadcast media is fulfilling a role. They're just like doing a thing, and they're playing the algorithm game and trying to win metrics and stuff. I would say the spirit of TLC is to give zero shits about any of that. Not care about, because like it's with me. Like I really try to embody this, and I think it's true. I don't want success. PVK doesn't want success on his channel. I don't want more clicks. It depresses me if I make a live stream video and it gets like whatever 1,000 views and there's 2 comments, I'm like, that depresses me. Like that's annoying to me. I mean, you're getting engagement on the live stream, but like I do not want to use YouTube for money or status or any of that stuff. Neil, I want to make friends, I want to engage with people, and I want discipleship, which isn't to me primarily intellectual. Again, it's all of these dynamics of relationality, which includes intellectual.
It informs your intellectual too, and I think that I don't know if this is the right word. We'll push back a little to say, like, if I have opportunities to develop status by a conversation, I don't want to reject it for the very sake that because this will give me status, I want to reject it. I
probably would, but that's just like a character flaw on my part.
So, but at the same time, that is only a part of what's happening, not the function of what's happening. Like, okay, someone wants to talk to me, or I just see someone. Okay, can I approach this? I don't want to talk to this guy because it's going to give me X, Y, and Z. I want to talk to this guy because there's something here. But now, if I do, that person, because there is said status, will automatically happen regardless. Yeah. So and I don't know if I can approach everything like that. Like, I mean, I don't, I want to, but then there's also, even when I talked to Edge of Thought, I was like, Tom, I was like, I don't think anybody in this space knows Tom. But Tom was at the Peterson lectures, and he's looking for this conversation and community, and it's like, well, he's not even in this space a whole lot. And but I want to bring him into this space. That is, so I could, it's not going to be like, oh, there was the thought that went through my brain, like, well, TLC people aren't even going to know this guy, so they aren't even going to be interested in talking to him about or to listen. Like there was this weird thing there, like having to contend with that idea. It was like, no, like it ended up being really pretty special just to talk with him. And so there's just a lot of things at play. I think that, because I mean, Paul monetizing, but then Paul also, Paul's thinking about his retirement and what that might look like. And I think that has to be a real, like if he turns that into his retirement job, okay, I don't know.
Yeah. I guess my big fear with it is, and I've said this before, or concern, is it becoming the thing that it was an antidote for to begin with. And that's the binding and blinding of the status thing. Because like that's what PVK said in that Bishop Barron, because he was like, Jordan should talk to, like, I understand wanting to talk to Bishop Barron because Bishop Barron's like, he's got status, he's out there and he's smart and he's got all these things. But this is what happens, I think, in those dynamics is they become, it's the same way. It's like when Kale was talking with PVK about catechism and how that works. And like when they were growing up, it was this very rote thing. Like, here's the answer to the question, and then you repeat it. But like, why that's so different than using things in your own words? Because it's the God of your own understanding. And this is the thing with TLC, with as crazy it is and without status and all that, even though it's emerging, you have to use your own words because people just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't give a shit about your status because you don't have any. So like, if we're going to actually talk, you actually have to communicate with me. And that's what PVK was talking about a little bit with Bishop Barron that was disappointing, is like JBP would say something that he found interesting, PVK found interesting, and then Bishop Barron would just kind of reply with like one of his typical kind of rote little sermonettes that he does. I have no interest in that. That is completely boring to me. I've heard it before. It's map territory. That's not interesting. It's like what Jordan Peter says with ideological possession. If you can predict what somebody else is going to say all the time, you're not talking to a person, you're talking to a principality. And to some degree that happens as you get to know a person. Like can AI model me? That's like one of the things. Like if they just Chad asked that question.
You got some Lukeisms. There are so who am I talking to, the Lukeism or Luke?
Yeah, it's kind of like my wife loved that Super Bowl commercial where that one girl who was in she was in one of those like raunchy comedies of my high school youth. I can't remember what her name was. Like Stifler's mom, whatever that girl is. You know what I'm talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Anyhow, Road Trip or whatever, and the one that actress, but she has that commercial. It's really short where she calls up the thing and she's just like, yeah, sometimes when I call these, I just like to talk to a person, and I don't know, if you're a robot or are you a robot? And she's like, I'm not a robot. Are you a robot? And then she just goes like, I don't know. So like, I mean, I actually think that's a great Peter Rollins line that I love, is he said, AI won't be sentient when it knows what it wants. It'll be sentient when it doesn't know what it wants. Because I think that's the right brain thing that I don't think AI is ever going to be capable of, is like the lack, the what I don't know, the mystery, the truth beyond the truth I currently apprehend in my left brain. Like that's what makes us human, that's what makes us iconic in our thinking. And I don't think AI is going to be able to do that. But could it map me? That's what I want in conversations. Like, because truly, like that's what will happen. It's the same thing with your algorithm or you're watching stuff. You get bored because it's mapped. It's no longer iconic. There's nothing new. You want new things. You want innovative things. You want to go further up and further in. And if you're talking to somebody where you can't do that, they just have their rote talking points because they've, I don't know, hyper systematized themselves and have rote answers for things. That's boring. Like if all you're going to do is pull parrot to me Sunday school answers, I don't want to talk to you.
Well, that's what's interesting. You think about, I call them the heavy hitters, Peterson, Joe, Vervaeke. Like, so they have their own club, their own status club. Not, and I'm not talking about high status, but like that they're like, they feel normie around each other or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we can just talk, and they would have these conversations and they post them up or something. And it's also, we are still like we are now 5 to 7 years down the road modeling that thing. They can't do it anymore. But I don't know, in 5 years, if you keep doing Luke, things are going to happen, Luke, if you keep doing this regardless. And even if you push away, like, say you still are doing Luke, but then there's 1,000 people listening to you, and then, you know, you get emails all the time, and you're like, well, I do want to talk to this person, but I'm not going to talk to I don't know. I'm just,
you can't.
Right. And so what I'm trying to say is, as I've come into this, and then now I've had my own version of Rando's conversations, because now I have 350 followers, and this guy is just starting and he's got 15, but I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to do, as things move up, can these things still push down? And people may, you know, in a few years, people may say, find you or find me. They don't find PVK. And it's like, well, what are they modeling? Are they still modeling some form of random personal conversation that then challenges a people that are down, like that these thing keeps pushing down? I don't know if I'm making sense, but like, by making the choices to still, by Paul making the choice, like Paul will still talk to people he thinks that are interesting, that has status, you know, and he will use
selective about it though.
Yeah, but he can be, but he still does it, and it still is reciprocal. But that, I mean, that model has challenged me to keep doing that, instead of just going after, well, I'm only going to try to DM this person that's got this X status, you know, like, it's like, well, so as opposed to, no, I'm going to this, I don't know, man. I
almost try to like curate myself to a degree where like somebody with status would never want to talk to me.
Well, at some point, that's probably going to attract people with status.
Yeah, maybe. Because it's funny, because like on my video where I tagged Gavin Ortland and Jordan B. Cooper, because I was trying to illustrate Christian YouTube stuff, and I wasn't trying to, you know, but speak poorly of them or bad talk them, but I am trying to talk about the spirit that I think that I see, this pattern behind the superficial pattern, and that, because we're all participating in that stuff. That's powers and principalities. And Gavin replied, and I had a decent interaction with him back and forth. It was okay, you know. It was nice. It was very humanizing. It was actually testimonial, where he was just like, you know, this is what's going on with me. I'm actually very busy, whatever. That was great. And Jordan B. Cooper's response was like, I was telling Chad last night, it essentially feels like at the end of Billy Madison, where they're playing Jeopardy, and he's just like, and nowhere during your rambling, incoherent answer was there anything remotely resembling anything that made any sense. You know, may God have mercy on your soul. and part of that is like, it's a dance that I do, and I'm maybe on a spectrum of this, but I do that intentionally, because that gets at my personal knowing. Like, you're not going to understand me intentionally without initiation. And I try to bridge that somewhat, and I'll allude to other things, but like, I'm almost the opposite of a Gavin Ortland YouTube thing, where it's just like this reference, and you just like quote out. It's just like basically references and then quotes from people throughout history. And I mean, that's laying out its own mosaic, but like, I very intentionally have Lukeisms and weird combinations of words and things that are going to be like nonsense to you unless you've been initiated in this, because I'm not going to give you the kind of transactional definitional knowing, because that is implicitly playing into rationalism and propositional tyranny. People who want a definitional understanding, implicitly, whether or not they know it, are playing the game of rationalism. And I'm not going to play that game. I'm going to play a different game. And so, like, I don't know. I get your point. I think it's valid. You don't want to create this kind of, we made a video once, like not woke, not anti-woke. I don't want to be a propositionalist. I don't want to be anti-propositional. I don't want to be lopsided left brain, but I'm not anti-left brain. I'm not anti-confession. I'm anti-confessionalism. It's a principality. It's a spirit. I don't want to be anti-status or something. It's just I really don't want to play the game of blind, systematized credential.
Yeah, that's a zero-sum game. It is, because you're trying to get, basically, trying to get to one person at the top. Like, that's ultimately what that is doing. And Jordan Hall, when who was he? I think it was Vervaeke, when he had that recent conversation with Vervaeke, and he goes, I can't remember even how he said it, but it was like a positive-sum game or something.
Yeah.
And he did it. And that's the only thing, like, which he actually, I mean, I was watching some of his really old stuff, and like he's been talking about that for a long time, but he's actively done it.
Yeah.
He did the PVK. He went around and had randos.
Right. No, I totally agree. He did the circuit of nobodies, not the circuit of like big shots. And so some people do that. Jordan Daniel Wood does that too. Like he talks to nobodies if he can, and they reach out. Like he'll talk to anybody. So,
and I think that's a certain. That idea's coming from somewhere. And I think that's one that I guess we hopefully propagate, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know. I have there's obviously, I'll psychoanalyze myself. There's, I grew up poor. There's this weird blue collar, I can play the game of an academic, but I don't. I can do that a little bit and use some of that language, and like I'm not dumb, but like I don't like that stuff. I don't like highly technical things, and Chad was saying this. Like I grew up, that's the way my dad is, just like engineers thinking they know shit, and he's like, they don't get it. They're not operating in the real world, sitting behind their desk pushing pens, like that's the kind of stock that I come from, and fundamentally, I do have resentments against it. I'll just confess that, to like the game of academia. I went to college. I got a degree in chemistry. But like the reason I did that is because I could do that with like no effort, like getting drunk all the time. Like if I actually had to submit myself to really structured systems and rigor, and like writing papers and stuff, like it would probably help me based on the way that I'm wired. It would probably be a good thing for me.
Might also kill your soul.
Huh?
It might also kill your soul.
It might do that, but it also might, depending. It would depend. Everything's a gift if you receive it as a gift. If I had the kind of humility to submit to it in love, even though I naturally kind of hate that stuff, and despite all the problems that I see with it, because that was always my issue in college, I was just like, why are you asking me to do this? You don't even know. You don't know why and to what end. I was always kind of asking those philosophical questions of like, what is the chief end of man? Like, why are you going to school? What? So you can go get a job and pay taxes and live in the suburbs behind a privacy fence and watch Netflix and be depressed? Why? Why would I do any of that stuff? So I don't know, man. It's I agree. I take your point. I like the criticism. I'm very much like Paul that way. I like the pushback on things. I know that I've experienced that really well in church. That's an area I think TLC can grow and improve. We do it a little bit, but like navigating conflict well. I think that's an area we can improve, doing it to some degree publicly, because I suppose we have to a little bit. I don't know the degree of that, because that came up like the Matthew 18 thing. If you have a problem with someone, go to them privately. I don't know. As TLC grows, it's going to be all that stuff, man.
Yeah. So how much do you feel like it's grown? Because I posted a little clip like 2 days ago from that guy that Jordan Hall had a conversation with. He did a follow-up conversation. I should probably find his video so I can give him proper credit. But he had a follow-up video about his conversation with Jordan Hall, and he said specifically, if you're coming at it from this place, or you're, Paul Vanderklay and that little scene, the TLC, he literally said that. And
some guy that was talking to Jordan Hall said TLC.
Yeah, let me see if I can get his.
Yeah, dude, that's what's
he
interesting.
called it PVK's scene. And I had just done a video about this ain't a scene. It's an arms race. And I was like,
yeah.
Let me get there. I've got it on my profile here.
While you're looking for it, no, I know, man, because I brought up TLC and Paul Vanderklay to Gavin, and he said he'd never really heard of TLC stuff, but he said he's looking to make friends, and he knows of Paul. So like, eventually it will catch on. And sometimes, I don't know, there's like a zeitgeist too, because sometimes like I'll listen to Rogan now occasionally or something, or you'll hear some of the big name people say things, and I'm just like, that's like pretty particular TLC language. And I don't know if they're getting it directly from us, or if it's just like a mutual, because like calculus arose in two people completely independently at the same time, because it's like morphic field shit.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
This is Brendan Graham.
I don't know.
In this episode, I offer my own take on the God pivot towards Christianity in the intellectual dark web and adjacent communities. He said, Paul Vanderklay and that scene, this little corner of the internet, and he kind of smirked when he said it. And I was just like, and he's got like 5,000 subs, and he and Jordan Hall went back and forth pretty hardcore. I think this guy, I don't know, he responded to some of my comments, and he was saying something. He was like, I wish Christianity would be more progressive. And he was talking about like historical biblical criticism, like taking, because what he's seeing with all this going back to the mythical and mystic kind of thing, he's like, I think it bothers him. I think it seems like he's kind of deconstructed, and if he is still a Christian, I don't even know. And I was like, well, what? I did the lightsaber. I was like, what do you mean by progressive? And he said, well, not regressive, back to these things. And I was like, man. And then I commented, I was like, I feel like Christianity's so progressive that it doesn't even know like that it's Christian anymore. And that's kind of Tom Holland's point. I was like, so we've gone there, man. As far as we can take it, I feel like. So maybe it's okay to regress to some things because we can't even recognize it as Christianity. We think this is what the world is. That's Tom Holland's point.
Right. I mean, it's the religion that's not a religion. But also, if it's the religion that's not a religion, it would include the religions too. Where
are you going with that, Luke?
It's kind of like it's kind of like when McGilchrist says the non-duality that includes duality. Or that's Jordan Daniel Wood stuff of like the Christologic of the identity of identity and non-identity, which whatever. It's this Hegelian idea, but that doesn't mean that so it's an identity that's beyond identity, but will include the people that are stuck in their identitarian tribalists.
Oh, this is the universal. This is the universalism stuff, right?
Well, I mean, So I've said, Nate and I have had these conversations a lot too. And CW keeps telling me I should say universal reconciliation, because universalism has a very particular meaning that is like, it's not what you mean.
Universal reconciliation.
Yeah. Or whatever. The Greek word that they talk about within the church is apokatastasis or whatever. Yeah. God reconciling all things to himself. And I just don't like, this is what's weird. It's kind of like I've said to people, I'm strange in this way of like the people that are true agnostic atheist types. I can get there from an intellectual point, because I'm like, if you're a rationalist and you're looking for certainty and you're pursuing truth in that bent, you're going to be agnostic about everything. You have to be agnostic about everything, because you can never have that kind of knowledge. That kind of knowledge isn't available to you. But like I can't imagine being an atheist. I can't imagine not believing in God. And I mean that like very literally. I can't imagine it. I don't even know what that would mean. I simultaneously can't imagine a non-universal reconciling God. I don't know what that looks like. Do
you feel like you used to know what that looked like?
I think, that's a great question. I mean, I did somewhat, but it was in a very, I was still very much in that divided man mode of just like a lot of ignorance. Because I remember that moment, that shift when it happened, when I watched that YouTube video, that debate. And I remember just being like, wait a minute, like this guy's clearly like, this guy is where I'm resonating with way more, but he's saying the wrong answer. And I was just like, what? And I mean, I just don't think, it's kind of like a fish not knowing you're wet. Until that point, I had never been around anyone or had conversation. I was siloed. I had never been around anyone that was just like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And that makes no sense. And how does this work? And I just had never even been exposed to it. It was very much that like the modes of classical education, where you start off in the grammar phase, which is like when kids are little, elementary school, which is like pull parrot, where you just, through singing and rhyme and dance, you just teach them things that they repeat, 2 + 2 = 4. And then you move on to the logic phase, where you learn middle school. Kids are starting to argue, might as well teach them how to do it well. And you teach them all the logic and the structure and logical fallacies. And then, but the goal of all those is always to move on to the poetic and the rhetorical, which to persuade. And actually, the Greek New Testament word to persuade actually means to like convince oneself. Interesting side note. But like you, when you move into the poetic, you learn how to break the rules. It's like anything, learning to play piano, like learn the scales. But at the end, if all you're doing is playing the scales, you're not a piano player. Like Beethoven and like the greats are not just playing scales. They're breaking rules, they're bending rules, but it's a kind of faithful innovation. The goal is always that faithful poetic.
Yeah, I heard you say that. About a month ago, faithful innovation, and that I relate to that. I feel like that's
the progressive thing. That's the progression that your buddy was talking about, or your.
Well, he's not my buddy, but I think that,
your whatever he was, acquaintance.
The guy I commented on his YouTube channel about progressive.
You guys are friends.
Yeah. Now I guess we are. I did. I don't know if that was what he meant by progressive. I felt like, it's. I asked him. I was like, "What did you read, Luke Timothy Johnson?" Like in my undergrad, I read that about the Jesus Seminar, which was the beads of like Jesus for sure did this, Jesus maybe did this, Jesus did, and like, well, that's historical criticism. That's literally considered historical criticism. Oh, this is this. And he's like, well, I didn't think that his arguments were that good. I think that N.T. Wright has a better handle. I was like, okay, that's fair, because N.T. Wright wasn't even happening like in my world until after I was out of school.
Right.
But I was like, that still was kind of pointing to me like, well, what new, because maybe I don't know, but like what new criticisms are out? Like, I think we've like done as much as we can, like with the criticism of the Christian faith, like I feel like it's like in the West, like I feel like we've exhausted that.
It's been thoroughly criticized.
And so I don't know. So that's not, I don't think progressive was what he was thinking, or when you're saying faithful innovation, because I don't look at the Jesus Seminar as a faithful innovation. Like that doesn't.
No, because I think this is why I think like it's, the faithful innovation is more like the spiral, where it's mystical. It's surrounding a mystical, never reachable
reality
kind of telos. Whereas I think most progressivism, because it came out of this rationalist, objectivist framework, is that we're progressing towards something, towards certainty, towards something certainty, encapsulable, toward like the exclusivist religion of the right side of history, like scientism. That's the kind of progressivist faith of scientism, is like, we don't know yet, but we'll know. Okay, buddy. Sure.
So I guess, maybe that was what he was. I don't know. Maybe he was wanting more of that, but I'm like, dude, there's plenty of that. I don't know where else to like. And when you run up against Jordan Hall, that in that conversation, I was like, this is. I don't know how else to say. This is progress. Like Jordan Hall is progress. But I think he maybe saw it as, because he became evangelical in the church that he attends. Oh, then he's regressive. And I was like, you're missing it or something, because that's actually not what's happening.
He's a unique creature in that evangelical world, because I think he truly is seeking faithful innovation. But I would say classically evangelicalism is, this came up in the Sam conversations, is restorationist. Like, we need to get back to the pure time of the New Testament and the true church and the.
I think he, and I find myself in a similar, is in a situation of faithful innovation. He's not in, like, the people that he's communing with are in a space of faithful innovation, more or less, I feel like.
Seems like to me from what I've seen, but
yeah. So, and that is progress to me, not trying to do more historical criticism. I'm like, where else can you go with that? I have no idea. But
well, it's that Peugeot thing. It's always protest. It's always something against. You can't build on just criticism.
Yeah. That was a beautiful line from Father DeYoung, which was like, anything that's built on something that you're against ends up as in nihilism.
Yeah, because I think that's true.
And even the very statement of the word atheism, like, you are defined by what you are not.
Yeah.
But that also is what so much of what I was talking about earlier about the nihilism within a certain type of Protestantism, because you talk about the exclusivists, however you say that.
Religion of the right side of history. Yeah.
Because you are defined by
what you're against.
Whether that's
an empty sign, like I'm against this.
You're more defined by the fact that you aren't Catholic than you are that you are Protestant or something.
Right.
But even the word protest is being defined by what you are protesting.
No, totally.
And so
I was just gonna say I gotta go, but
yeah, me too.
But one thing I would say to that, it's like I made a few comments on Sam's video where he's talking to that Catholic guy, and I just said something in there, like, one of the reasons, because he said something like, the guy who was talking to this Catholic cat said, like, we need to look at the data and see where it goes. And I just made the comment of, like, that's why I ended up going there's lots of reasons why I ended up going Catholic, because I was raised Protestant. I was so anti-Catholic, but I'm way more open to it now. But I said, looking at the data and then analyzing the data to, like, that's still a very kind of scholastic academic mindset. And I was saying something, and I was just making the kind of testimonial point. That's why I went Orthodox, and just pointing that out. And like, somebody came after me in the comments and was like, I don't know, my sensitive, wounded soul, it hurt, and it came, but it was very much that thing. It's like, I want us to get, this is probably my admonition to all of us in the little corner. I want us to get to the kind of place where you can say, like, I want to be able to say, like, this is why I went Orthodox and not Catholic, without people like having some kind of like tribal, because I'm not trying to do this when I say this. Like, I'm not this. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say, because you ought to be able to say, I went Orthodox, or I'm staying Protestant, or wanting to stay an evangelical, without hearing, like, he's not Orthodox.
Or without hearing, I think you're wrong, even.
Right.
I think that's the, like, and I think that's the hope is, like, when Chad had Kale and Neil do that conversation together, that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Was embodied. I'm me saying this doesn't say imply that you're wrong. It implies that this is where I'm at, but I hopefully in this corner, we're saying, yeah, and we're here together, but we're in different places, and that's okay. That is really okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Unity and diversity.
There you go.
All right, buddy.
That's the last word. I'm going to hit the bumper, stick around for half a minute, and we'll close this thing out. All right. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.